January 5, 1965. In the middle of the Korean demilitarized zone, a 25-year-old Army sergeant from the 8th Cavalry Regiment steps into the frozen mud. He carries a canteen, a pack of cigarettes, and a decision that will trap him inside the borders of North Korea for the next 40 years. There were no defection papers and no weapons. He was simply a man who realized that staying on his side of the line meant a deployment to Vietnam, a jungle halfway around the world. But within hours of crossing, the North Korean State Security Department captures him. They don't execute him. They don't release him. They disappear him. By 2004, this man will have seen more of North Korea's inner workings than any American in history. The border behind him vanishes into the snow, replaced by a wall of concrete and surveillance. He is alone in the most fortified zone on Earth, facing a regime that executes its own generals without blinking. Hundreds of scopes are trained on this strip of mud, but only one guard with a rifle is enough. His name is stripped from the army rolls. His family is told he is gone. In Pyongyang, he becomes a number, a file in a cabinet. He is entering a country that doesn't exist on most maps, a nation built on secrets. And he is about to become the keeper of the biggest one. Why did both governments need him alive? And what did he see that made his survival worth more than his punishment? The truck ride was blind. Canvas flaps slapped against the metal frame, sealing out the snow. Jenkins sat on a wooden bench, handcuffed, listening to the engine hum and the tires crunch over frozen ruts. He didn't know where he was going or what waited for him. The vehicle stopped. Doors swung open, and harsh light flooded the cargo space. A man stood there silhouetted against the snow. He wore a uniform crisp enough to cut glass. No insignia, no name tag, just authority. This was the section chief. He wasn't a guard. He was a manager. He looked at Jenkins like a farmer inspecting livestock. Without a word, he gestured. Jenkins stepped down into the snow, his boots sinking inches deep, and followed the men toward a compound surrounded by walls. Inside, the air smelled of boiled cabbage and stale tobacco. A man named Min led him to a room with bare walls and a single metal chair. Min sat opposite him and opened a file, Jenkins' file. It was already thick with photos from the border and patrol reports. They hadn't just caught him, they had been watching him before he ever crossed. Min spoke perfect, unaccented English. "You are not a prisoner," he said. "You are a guest." It was a lie, and both men knew it, but the script had to be read. You will eat, you will sleep, you will work. Then, Min closed the file and delivered the conditions. If you try to leave, you die. If you try to hide, you die. If you try to speak without permission, you die. But if you cooperate, you will live. We have use for you. The door locked, and the bolt slid home with a heavy clank. Jenkins sat in the silence. He wasn't in a prison camp. Not yet. He was in a laboratory, and he was the specimen. The state moved him into the heart of the dictatorship. He was no longer a soldier, he was a resource. But here is what makes this truly terrifying. Jenkins wasn't the only American who crossed. 4 soldiers defected in the 1960s. Larry Allen Abshire, James Joseph Dresnock, Jerry Wayne Parrish, and Charles Jenkins. They all walked the same path into the frozen mud. But by the time Jenkins escaped in 2004, the other 3 were dead. They died inside the system. Jenkins was the only one who walked out. Why did he survive when the others didn't? What did he do differently? Or what did the regime allow him to do that they didn't allow the others? The U.S. Army marked him as lost. The North Korean state marked him as acquired. Both governments assumed he was gone forever. They were wrong. Jenkins was being stored. And when you store a witness for 4 decades, you give him time to see everything, to become the only American who knows what actually happens inside those walls. 5 a.m. The lock clicks. A bowl of gruel slides through the slot. The smell of fermented cabbage and stale water fills the room. Jenkins doesn't eat immediately. He listens. Rhythmic bootsteps echo in the hall, stopping at his door. A shadow blocks the light under the frame. He freezes. The steps move on. This was the daily reality. Wake up, eat rice and kimchi, sit in a room, and wait. Repeat. Isolation was the weapon. No news of the Vietnam War, no knowledge of the Cold War shifting, no letters from home. He existed in a vacuum of North Korean time, where the rules were simple. Obey, survive, don't escape. The stakes escalated quickly. In the first year, Jenkins saw what happened to those who resisted. Some detainees disappeared. Others came back broken. He understood that compliance was the only currency that mattered. If he were caught planning an escape, the punishment wasn't a cell, it was a public warning to everyone else. Yet Jenkins was given privileges. He wasn't starved or beaten like the average prisoner. Why? Because a dead American was useless. A living American was a tool, a prop to be used against the United States. They gave him work, teaching English, translating documents, and appearing in videos. Each task tied him closer to the state, but each task also gave him access. He saw the instructors, the students, and the materials. He learned how the propaganda machine functioned and where the files were kept. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was an employee, and employees know things that prisoners don't. Then, North Korea made their first mistake. They put him in front of a camera. They thought they were controlling the narrative, using him to send a message to America. They didn't realize they were creating evidence. Every frame of film was proof that he was alive, and that the regime was holding him. Proof he might one day use against them. His teaching wasn't for random students. He was teaching the children of the elite, the sons and daughters of the party officials running the state security department. In his classroom, they asked questions and repeated things their parents said at dinner. Without even trying, Jenkins was mapping the regime's leadership from the inside out. The propaganda bureau called him in. He was given lines to read, anti-American rhetoric and confessions of crimes he never committed. He looked into the lens and said the words. These tapes were shipped to every school and factory. Every North Korean citizen knew his face as the American who proved capitalism had failed, but trophies can be counted and tracked. The regime wanted visibility, but visibility meant he could be demanded back. He was the most famous American in North Korea, and he was completely trapped. Every word was a calculation. Every smile was a survival tactic. Why did both governments need him alive? The army could have prosecuted him, but they waited. They knew a prisoner in North Korea was worth more than a prisoner in Fort Leavenworth. Jenkins was seeing things no spy could ever reach. Time was on their side. They let him become the ultimate insider. For 15 years, he survived alone. Then, in 1980, the regime gave him something they never intended to, a family. They arranged a marriage to another captive. Her name was Hitomi Soga. She was Japanese. She had been abducted, and she would become the key to everything. For the first time, he wasn't alone. He had a wife and a home. The regime thought a family would make him more controllable and dependent. They were right. It gave him something to lose. But it also gave him a team. The asset was now a father, and fathers take risks that single men don't. They had 2 daughters, Micah and Brenda, born as citizens of a country they couldn't leave. The stakes were now absolute. 1 life at risk had become 4. Jenkins had to plan for their survival. If he failed, they would all disappear. They lived in the compound, raising children while handlers watched and cameras recorded. Night after night, Jenkins whispered stories to them. Stories of California beaches and stores filled with food. When they asked if America was real, he told them yes. When they asked if they could go, he said, one day. Hope was the only ration that never ran out. The years bled together. By the 1990s, famine hit. He saw the hunger in the eyes of the gods and the system beginning to fray. He realized the window was closing. If he waited too long, the door would seal forever. If he moved too soon, they would die. He had to time it perfectly. By 2004, Jenkins had been inside for 39 years. He knew the abduction programs, the camp locations, and the security operations. He made a decision. They would escape. Not across the DMZ. That was suicide. They would go to China, then Japan, then the US. It was a long, desperate route. July 2004. Night. The compound is quiet. Jenkins signals Hitomi, and they move. They reach the river, the ice-cold water biting through their clothes. A spotlight sweeps the bank. They duck underwater until it passes. Every step was a fight against the current and the fear. Behind them, the lights of North Korea faded. They traveled through China like ghosts, avoiding checkpoints until they reached Niigata, Japan. They walked into a police station and surrendered. They gave their names and their story, and then they waited. Would the US imprison him? Would Japan send them back? What Jenkins didn't know was that the US had already made up its mind. They had been tracking him for decades. They knew that locking him up would bury the intelligence he carried. This wasn't about justice, it was about extraction. They needed what was in his head. In a room on a US military base, an officer slid a single piece of paper across the table. The verdict: a dishonorable discharge and 30 days confinement. No prison time. Despite 40 years of desertion, the laws were set aside because his testimony was worth more than a court-martial. Jenkins debriefed for months. He told them about the camps, the abductions, and the propaganda. He gave them 40 years of insider knowledge that no spy could ever gather. The reframe was complete. Jenkins wasn't a traitor anymore. He was a witness. Charles Jenkins died in 2017 on Sado Island, Japan, at the age of 77. He lived his final years in freedom with Hitomi and his daughters. He didn't seek fame, he sought peace, and he found it. But his story leaves a haunting question about the others. 4 American soldiers crossed in the 1960s. 3 died in the dark. Jenkins was the only one who walked out alive to tell the tale. The State Security Department still exists, and the abductions remain a scar on history. But Jenkins exposed them. His daughters now live in Tokyo, working ordinary jobs and raising their own children. They are free because their father survived. 4 decades watching, learning, and surviving inside the world's most paranoid dictatorship. One man walked out.